Yes, he did.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Good evening. Welcome to Donnybrook. Charlie Brennan not with us tonight. He's not in trouble. I think he's in Cleveland, but maybe that is trouble. Hey, make sure you stay tuned tonight. We're having Paul Ziegler, CEO of EducationPlus, on Next Up. So that will be quite an interesting discussion as we head back to the classroom here in just a week, or in some cases, 2 weeks. Well, familiar faces, even with a guest today, but we're going to start with Wendy Wiese from KTRS, who's been getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, but still looks wonderful as usual.
Wow. Thank you, Alvin.
A founder, Bill McClellan, formerly of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, but still writes a column. He's got a good one this week. We're going to talk about it. Another founder, Ray Hartmann, has a show on KTRS, which I'm drawing a blank on. What's the name of your show, Ray?
St. Louis in the Know.
There you go. It's good. It's a good title. And you all know her from Channel 5 and this program, Christine Byers. How are you doing today, Christine?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, we're going to start with you. All right. There was I guess a grand jury report that comes out that is filed after a grand jury is no longer impaneled. That's about 3 months. And they did not really have, glowing recommendations of Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner. Said that a lot of things came before them that just weren't necessary, and they had some other concerns. What are your thoughts on that?
So you're right. So basically, this is a panel of 12 grand jurors that get together, and they're impaneled for 3 months at a time. And after the end of their service, they're basically asked to give critiques on various aspects of the justice system. And so this week, I got a hold of the grand jury's report that was impaneled from February through May. And they basically talked about how they felt that the bitterness, in their word, between Kim Gardner's office and the police department was a detriment to public safety. They found that the way that cases were presented were done on an inconsistent basis. And her office made promises to fix it. The problems were never addressed, which made them think that these promises to fix them were not made in good faith. So basically, Kim Gardner's response was that this grand jury was out of bounds in critiquing her office, that this is not within their scope, that they should just be focusing on facilities like the workhouse or the downtown jail or the courthouse, et cetera. And basically that she also thought that this was not reflective of the majority opinion of this grand jury. But she did not address whether or not their allegations were true or not.
Well, if she didn't, I don't know enough about this. I didn't know grand juries did this kind of stuff where they would weigh in on the competence of a prosecutor. I haven't seen it done before. Their argument is it's non-compliant and that it was the opinion of one or two people, whatever, but wasn't the group. If that's true, and I'm not saying it is, I say if that's their argument, why would she respond to the substance? If she thinks it's non-compliant and it doesn't speak officially for the grand jury, I wouldn't respond either. But I mean, I don't know. That doesn't look, I don't think there's any question that Kim Gardner's office needs to be overhauled. We've talked about that before, but, and there was a story this week where there was her office won a murder case. They won another one in June. And the one thing the two of them had in common was there was no reference in the Post-Dispatch, and I understand the Post doesn't have resources to cover these trials like it once did, but if Kim Gardner had lost either of those cases, she would have been the lead of the story. If they lost, they won 2 murder cases, got life in prison both times. And it literally wasn't even mentioned that there was a prosecutor there. I mean, you could normally, I know when I covered something.
Let me step in.
Let me finish, Bill.
No, Rick. Let me step in for a minute on this. First of all, if when there's a trial and somebody wins or loses, we almost never throw in, like I've done this for years, and I wouldn't write that George Peach's office got a conviction. I would write that the circuit attorney's office did, and
that's fine. They didn't. They didn't mention
in the story. It says St. Louis. That's the circuit attorney's office, and I think Kim Gardner has a policy where people can't talk to us. And if I were the reporter, and I used to be spiteful, and if some prosecutor or defense attorney wouldn't talk to me, I think, okay, I'll just leave his name out of the story anyway. So, the idea that if this would have been an acquittal, Kim Gardner's name would have been in the story or in the headline, that's nonsense.
No, it isn't.
I'm not here to argue how the Post-Dispatch covers these cases. I'm here to say that Kim Gardner didn't address the allegations in this report. And I find that to be problematic.
But at the same time, this is the same circuit attorney who blamed FMLA for an attorney not being in the courtroom to represent the circuit attorney so that an accused killer walked out of jail. So, this is kind of part and parcel for what we have. I'm sorry, Ray, for what we've come to expect. I know she was elected, but her story is compelling, and a lot of people are rooting for her. But it's turning into it's a sinkhole now.
That was family and maternal leave that Wendy was referring to.
We talked about this last week. She did. The judge made a decision to let that murder suspect go, but they did get him back, fortunately. But
a week later, and a block away from the victim's family's house.
I think what's that?
A week later. Yeah. And a block away from the victim's family's house.
And the victim's family had not been notified
I fault the judge in that case,
as they should have.
I've said it. We've said it over and over. The fact that she needs to upgrade and improve the management of her offices, including her messaging, quite frankly, because what they don't do that I disagree with is they don't do press releases, unlike, say, Wesley Bell's office, which is very good at informing the public when they have victories. They don't do it. I think they're wrong not to do it. But there's this perception out there that they never put anybody behind bars. It's not true. I'm sorry, Bill. I didn't say they should mention Kim Gardner's name, but the fact is I covered trials when I was a daily newspaper reporter. You don't ignore the existence of a prosecutor.
No.
Okay. All right. Well,
this attack on the press that, that the press is not mentioning her name in a story about convictions. We never do, Ray. I would never mention.
Tell me if Nels Moss ever won a case that he didn't get his name in a paper.
That's because Nels Moss was not the circuit attorney. He was the prosecutor, and he talked to us. We wouldn't not mention Nels Moss, but mention D. Joyce Hayes runs the office.
I guess you come from a different idea of publishing, Bill, because we had a lot of people at the RFT we didn't like, but we wouldn't leave their name out because we were mad at them.
Oh, well, no, wait a minute. I'm not going to argue that. I'm not going to argue that, but any publication I ever worked at, I would not want anybody to go back and screen 20 years worth of stories to see who we didn't mention their names, and who we did a job on. Oh, no. No, none of us can stand behind that placard. Moving on. Okay, it's time to go back to school, Wendy. And we're going back, and we don't know if we're wearing masks. And I guess we do know that teachers don't have to. It's not a vaccination mandate. Your feelings as we head back to school in this time of question as far as the COVID is concerned?
Well, it was funny because Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker has been he's been roundly applauded for his decisiveness on this and saying no ifs, ands, or buts. A mask, that masks are required in schools throughout the state of Illinois. And then it sounds like, okay, well, that's all there is to that. Well, that's not all there is to that, because they are screaming bloody murder in the suburbs. They want J.B. Pritzker's head. The parents do not want this. They want to know when this is going to end, when these demands are going to end locally. At least as of this hour on this Thursday, you have Rockwood, Parkway, and Afton schools also requiring masks. I'm sure that there will be a furor over that decision as well. But I am in favor of masks in the classrooms. I would be in favor if my children were still in school. I have a grandson who's not old enough to go to school, but I would want him to wear a mask when we're this far into the second wave of this virus.
To me, it's such a small ask for children to be having a better chance of in-person learning. It's such a small ask. Just do it.
Yep.
I just think it's so sad that it's what there was a legitimate argument about whether the economy should be shut down and businesses shut down. And interesting, you mentioned a Democratic governor. This isn't all partisan. The governor, the Republican governors of Maryland and Vermont, both have been exemplary, and they're Republicans in being responsible. Unlike Mike Parson in our state, where if this was one of those societies where people did the right thing, he'd resign over just the outcome of COVID in our state. And it's just unbelievable that we're arguing about masks for kids. And it's not as bad here as it is in Florida, where the governor wants to cut off funding for school districts that have mask mandates. But it's really, I agree with Christine, it's so little to ask for to have just the kids protected, and by the way, the teachers too.
Yeah.
You know? All right. Now, speaking of teachers, Ray, shouldn't teachers be mandated, and shouldn't teachers unions just say, like, we're not going to fight it if a school district mandates that teachers and staff have to be vaccinated, unless you have a legitimate reason not to be?
I'm fine with that.
Anybody disagree with that?
No.
Because
I was just going to say, I've heard of some companies that actually are now kind of walking a line in the middle here with the vaccines. And they're basically saying, if you show us proof of your vaccine, then you don't have to wear a mask indoors. But if you choose not to show proof of your vaccine, you have to wear a mask indoors to their employees.
Okay.
Alvin, I could see a teachers union taking a position that says, if a teacher there may be some accommodation for that teacher to be part of virtual learning or some other, I don't know the details of union contracts, so forth. But the idea that a teacher has the right to refuse a vaccine and be in the classroom with kids, I ain't buying that at all. Okay, so I think if they might need to accommodate, not to fire teachers, but if we want people to do vaccines, we got to take away the stuff they want, whether they're jobs, going to the ball games. We can't make people get vaccines, but there's no law that says that you have a right to go to Busch Stadium if you're not vaccinated. And if you took that kind of thing away, more people would get vaccinated.
Yeah, I can tell you one just anecdotal story from my own experience. At the end of the last school year, one of the teachers in one of my kids' classrooms came down with COVID-19, which meant my kid had to miss the very last week of school. And it was horrible. And I was like, how is this fair to the parents, to the kids, and all that?
Right.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what.
And the teachers have been very vocal about how fearful they are to go back into the classroom. So you would think they would be at the front of the line to get the vaccine, but we've seen that what we think is going to happen isn't happening.
Well, the National Football League has taken away privileges if you're not vaccinated, i.e. you have to wear a mask and you can't go out to dinner and things like that. And that 65% rate of inoculation is now league-wide, like almost 90%. It works. If you take something away from people or don't give somebody something, it seems like they respond. So maybe school districts can look at it that way. All right, Bill, Dr. Cobb, he said he was spoken to terribly and jostled at the city council meeting a little over a week ago. Video and some testimony doesn't back that up. It's hard to say exactly what all happened, but where do we go from here with that story?
Well, like you mentioned, I was telling you before we went on that I just wrote about this for the weekend. And I'm a very self-centered person. And I want to see everybody get vaccinated for my own reasons. I'm an old guy with an immune compromised system. So I want people to be persuaded or ordered to get vaccinated. And when you have a healthcare official who misstates facts, like Dr. Khan apparently did with his, I was jostled and kind of fought my way out. I had to fight my way out of there, and that's why I flipped some people off. You can lose your composure and flip somebody off. That's okay. But when you're caught in what seems to be an obvious mistruth, that's terrible for a healthcare official, because then we have to turn around and try to convince people, you can trust me on this. So I look at Sam Page and I think, where does he find these people? They always seem to be doing something goofy. So I would think that Dr. Khan should either lose his job or at the very least be suspended, because this is serious stuff when a healthcare official is misstating facts and then trying to say, well, you should walk a mile in my moccasins. No, that's not what this is about, Dr. Khan.
Well, and what's so interesting, and apparently what he doesn't understand, is we have some of the best videographers in the country in this city, and they would have stayed with him from every inch. If he had been threatened, if his path had been obstructed by anybody in the county council, that video would have gone viral. And that's probably why it took 2 days for this story to get legs and to start getting traction, because it was a nothing burger.
Well, I'm sorry, Wendy, I was going to say, if I were giving a commencement speech to young people, I would say, live your life like you're on videotape, because you probably are.
That's a great point.
Everything is going to come back to bite you. And when you start making wild accusations, it just doesn't work.
Absolutely. And we can't just believe that one side can go into a council chamber with a preconceived idea about the other, because clearly that's what happened here.
Well, this is just additional fodder for the whole crowd out there who doubts everything that's coming out of our medical and scientific community right now. Anyway.
Right. Exactly right.
I have a little bit of mixed feeling, although I don't really disagree with most of what you say there, Bill. The problem, as far as where he found Dr. Khan, he found him from the last administration when Khan left because of Page and Stenger not getting along. But the thing that bothers me a little, I guess, is that I only had limited dealings with him, and watched him on Westlake and Coldwater Creek. He was so superior when he was handling that I think Charlie hired him and then Stenger kept him around. And he was so good on that. And I think it's so sad that somebody seems that good on this, and he's right on the healthcare stuff. I keep hoping that in the gap that's there in the tape somewhere, that there at least be some evidence that he was, I still, part of me can't believe he made up the entire thing. In other words, he obviously exaggerated being jostled or whatever. But as far as the part about somebody,
slurs,
yes, he just had no provocation to flip somebody off. I just can't imagine he made that part up. And I'm not saying he didn't. It's hard for me to figure out what ought to happen.
Well, I'm not so mad about flipping somebody off.
No, I know you weren't. I was the only one that thought it was funny.
Okay. All right. Now, meanwhile, we're kind of on a, cease and desist on the mask wearing, thanks to a St. Louis County judge's ruling. Now, this will still be, I guess we'll have another court hearing to determine how it all played out. But right now, technically, I guess you don't have to wear a mask indoors in St. Louis County until the 17th. We'll find out how that all plays out. Any thoughts on that just from the roundtable here? Are we in a wait and see mode, or are we in can we please move on from this mode, or how does everybody feel?
I want to see the council together make the decision, because I think the whole problem with this from the beginning was the way that Sam Page just unilaterally made the change, and that was what drew the ire of the council. So I want to see them put their money where their mouth is and say, if this isn't about masks, then okay, council, decide whether we should do a mask mandate together.
Okay, good point.
Alvin, that's a great question. In our family, everybody's wearing a mask indoors when we go out. And I'll add to this, and maybe it's the way people on this side ought to respond. If I'm and good for Schnucks and Deerbergs and all the grocery stores that they require it. And I'm not hanging out somewhere that doesn't, okay? In other words, I'm not going to sit here and tell anybody else what they ought to do. I'm going to vote with my feet. Okay. If it's a place, people with vaccinations can still get the Delta variant. my way of doing it, our family is, if you're going to have a business that's not requiring masks, we're not patronizing it. And I think if enough people look at it that way, I don't think the government is ever going to get its act together.
All right. Speaking of hanging out, Mary Barton is not hanging out at the St. Louis County Police Department. She resigned. She got like almost $300,000 for saying goodbye. Has sued, threatened to sue. I don't know. Something's going on. Ethical Society of Police chapter out there pretty much said good riddance. I hope I never, when I do finally get to retire, I hope it's not greeted like that. But Ray, are you sad to see her go? He said with his tongue in his cheek.
Well, about, a couple months ago when I charged up the hill and said, "Fire Mary Barton" in a headline, and looked around and didn't see any of the converts behind me. I was a little lonely out there for a minute. No, she was, a well-intended person, but just completely unqualified for that job, unsuited for it, whatever. And as far as her settlement, I mean, this is what we do in St. Louis, is pay large settlements, okay? When we don't lose big verdicts in the tens of millions like Keith Wildhaber, Ernie Trachis, we'll just pay off 60 grand, Nothing happened, of course. Absolutely nothing went wrong, but we'll give the lady 60 grand. This is just, she sued him. I think she either sued him or threatened to sue him.
What happened was she filed an EEOC complaint, which is the first step towards a discrimination lawsuit. It takes months and months and months for that EEOC body to come up with whether or not there's grounds for a lawsuit. By and large, they say go right ahead and sue.
And when is somebody in the police department going to be held accountable for all this money we're spending on these harassment? Whatever.
Well, that's St. Louis and St. Louis County. Now, Christine, let me ask you real fast. By taking the settlement, does that now negate the lawsuit? Maybe not legally, but what are your chances of winning if you took this money?
Basically, as part of the settlement agreement, she agreed to withdraw her complaint.
Okay.
So it is over. We'll never get to hear what her allegations of discrimination were, and whether or not there was any truth to them. So it's one and done.
Well,
remind our viewers who was responsible for that hire in the first place.
The St. Louis County Police Board of Commissioners, and that's a 5-member board. The members are appointed by the county executive, and it's their job to select the police chief and hire and fire the police chief and hold that police chief accountable.
And Sam Page's first choice did not get the job, as reported by Christine and others. So it's a mess. And go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, you may remember Sam Page famously saying on tape to Troy Doyle, the police board will do what I tell it to do. Mm-hmm. I would submit to you that Centene has given over $200,000 to Sam Page's campaign. And with Michael Neidorff having such an acute interest in policing, and, oh, by the way, had John Belbar, who was the last police chief before Mary Barton, as his top security guy, I think it might be said that Sam Page will do what Michael Neidorff tells him to do. So I hope that's not how we pick the next police chief. But I have to tell you, I really wonder.
Ray, we don't know how that's how they picked the last one.
We don't.
The idea that we don't know that Michael Neidorff said, "I don't want a black police chief."
I don't think he said that, by the way.
Well, Troy Doyle, I mean, that's part of the allegation.
That's part of his allegation. Now, speaking of that allegation, just like that one, now, if they offer Troy Doyle the job, and he says yes, doesn't that mean that his lawsuit goes away? I mean, it's...
Christine, it wouldn't?
No, because he is alleging the discrimination occurred when he was passed over for police chief. Now, one could argue that by making him police chief, he could certainly withdraw.
That's what I mean. That's kind of what I meant. When I said go away, I meant like he would now decide to make it go away.
I don't think he's going away. I mean, he's got recordings, and it sounds like if what he's saying is true about the recordings and things that he has already come out with, I think we're in this one for the long haul.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. If you were on the police board then and making the decision, and you said, well, we could, Doyle is going to sue us and he'll probably win. why don't we just make a deal? Let you be police chief if you will withdraw the suit. Would everybody be okay with that?
That's a great question, Bill. I mean, I don't know, because one of the problems with the county police board is you can't get a hold of them. They never talk to the public. I mean, they never explain their actions. We're not even allowed in their meetings yet. I mean, the county council is back to in-person meetings, but yet the county police board meeting, we have to do that over, WebEx or Zoom, and we're not allowed to question them. I've called them, I don't know how many times before. They don't return calls.
Right. Christine's so right.
It's good.
It's the single least accountable board in the St. Louis area by far.
I would say.
Well, or right up there. I don't know.
I would say second only to the former St. Louis City Police Board.
Oh, wait, that makes
sense.
Was well, yeah, but they're not around anymore. They don't exist. I'm talking about now.
We do still have a sunshine law in this state, don't we? It doesn't matter.
It's all personnel stuff.
It's all personnel. Now, part of the problem is somebody's getting fired, somebody's getting hired, somebody's suing every 5 minutes in St. Louis County. And these are, personnel matters, as embarrassing as that is.
Troy Doyle
That's true.
Alvin, Troy Doyle is, I've talked to so many people about this on both sides of the racial divide. Troy Doyle is so clearly the best choice for chief by so many people's measure, but this is about politics, and I'd love it personally. I'd like to see it happen. And as far as his lawsuit, that's just a number. They could settle that on the side, and they would have to settle it. Obviously, I mean, you're not going to have a police chief suing you. But the point is that part isn't hard. That coming to either dropping the suit or having a settlement on that suit isn't that hard. The question is politically. And again, I'm sorry, but let me clarify something, Bill. I never said that Michael Neidorf wouldn't hire somebody because he's black. That people.
Well, right. That was all the allegations.
I do think this.
That was a big part of it.
The personalities.
We don't know that.
I'll tell you what I think happened is between the personalities, which were not meshing between Chief Belmar and Lieutenant Colonel Doyle when he was there, Troy Doyle. I think that was a big factor.
Okay.
That's
all
not
right.
the
We're
kind
gonna
of
have
thing.
To go on that one. All right. Hey, Christine, thank you so much for sitting in this week. Look forward to seeing you again. You did great work. Keep it up on everything. Thanks for watching. You guys, Paul Ziegler, CEO of EducationPlus, coming up next. Thanks for watching.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Hi, and welcome to Next Up. We've got Dr. Paul Ziegler, CEO of EducationPlus. Great time to have this guest because we're about to go back to school. And after really the last year and a half, it's not normal, but maybe a little closer. So Dr. Ziegler, boy, you represent so many school districts. And I know a lot have different opinions as we head back into the school year, but if there's anything close to a consensus between all your members, what would you say it would be?
I think the consensus that we have is we want kids back in school. And I think where we're a lot different than we were a year ago is every district that I work with has a plan to have kids back to face-to-face learning with teachers. There'll be some of our parents that choose maybe a virtual option still, but every school district really looks at how can I have kids in a classroom with a teacher with as little disruption as possible? And then they balance that with what their community expectations are. So it may look different in some of our communities, but again, everybody has that face-to-face as part of the plan.
Dr. Ziegler, how much are you concerned that this could somehow become a state determined process as it is, for example, in the state of Florida, where the governor's threatening to cut off funds, whatever, for school districts that don't have that have mandates? Are you comfortable that this decision will be left to where I would think most of us think it ought to be, which is at the local level, local school districts making a decision based on their own situation?
Yeah, I really think it will. The governor has indicated in several times over the years that he's a strong proponent of local control. Certainly, I think a decision like this is one left best with the community or that local school board in conjunction with their leaders, because each one of our communities is a little affected a little differently, and each of them have a little different take on what's appropriate for their kids. And I think that's part of that local control. Kind of like I said, you got to balance what are those mitigating layers that I can put in within a classroom, along with what the community expectation is, and then that balance is through the school board and the local and the leaders to make that happen.
So and following up kind of on that, if a school district were to decide that, okay, we are going to make it mandatory for teachers and staff to be vaccinated, is that like an argument that you stay out of? Or if a school district said we're really going to make a push to our parents, to any student, 12 or older, to be vaccinated, do you kind of just let those play out by themselves, or would EducationPlus kind of have an opinion, or at least share it, with the school district?
Yeah, so one of the things we've been doing over the last 16, 17 months is really working closely with our medical communities. So certainly we have provided guidance from our pediatricians, from other medical professionals about vaccines, about mask wearing, about other mitigating layers. So certainly there's information out there that we've supplied our districts about what we think, or what those medical professionals think vaccinations are good for. And they really think it's probably the best mitigating layer based on what they're sharing with us in these meetings. So that would be out there. As far as a local battle, one, I don't think we'll see any of our schools require a vaccine. I just don't think that's something that is in the cards right now, at least until maybe some of the experimental use, or the, not experimental use, the limited authorization that's there and it gets full authorization. And even then, I think it'll be slow to be something that political subdivision like a school would require. I do think I could see some incentives that maybe come out of some school districts. Maybe if somebody's been vaccinated, meaning a teacher, and they have a breakthrough through COVID case, that maybe they would still be granted some COVID leave, as opposed to somebody who maybe didn't take the vaccine and then has a break or has COVID. Maybe there'd be some incentives that way to look at what might be a way to incentivize vaccines. But again, there's nobody out there that's going to require that. Same with kids. I think the biggest thing with kids that'll allow, if a parent wants to share that vaccinated status with a school, is it allows them to use that modified quarantine and stay in school, even if they're a close contact. If both parties had a mask on, they can stay in school in that modified quarantine as long as they're asymptomatic. And I think that lack of disruption is a great thing for kids, as well as parents, as well as teachers, as well as the community. So if we can get some traction on that, I think schools, again, will make sure that they emphasize that with parents.
Dr. Ziegler, I'm thinking that the pandemic has taken up more of your day than you might have expected. But tell our viewing audience a little more about EducationPlus, how you're structured and what your mission is, because it seems like it's like a lot of things, it's being deflected to the pandemic, and you do presumably a little bit more than that.
Yeah, so we're a cooperative of 54 local school districts in 6 charter schools. And really, we do 3 things. We're kind of that network and advocacy component, much like I talk about having those meetings to share best practice. We offer professional development, both for the local school district as well as through a contract with the state for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And then we have a cooperative purchasing platform that allows us to go out and bid things that then school districts can purchase through us, and they don't have to go out through that bidding process. It saves them time and money. So that's kind of our big pieces. We kind of took on the role of that network during the pandemic, and really I think 60 plus weeks we have met every Wednesday with superintendents, essentially to create a network of talk about what's working, what's not working, how are we going to approach different things. And that's really been a strong thing for our region, because not all regions have that, and being able to connect and do that. And then on Thursdays, we meet with a work group of some superintendents from each of the counties, as well as some pediatricians and other epidemiologists, and then some public health folks to really talk again, what would that guidance look like in a best case scenario?
That's a great service for the community. Is that after the pandemic, is this one of those things that, as painful as the pandemic has been for everybody, that it's something that you might take to the other side of it as a model for other kinds of your work?
Yeah, and actually we've seen, I don't want to call them imitators, but it kind of is in other regions of the state. Greater Ozarks, which is kind of that Springfield area, has a agency real similar to us, as does Kansas City. So they do. We're a little bit larger and we're a little older. We've actually been in existence for 93 years.
Really?
So, yeah. So I've got a little bit of a weight on my shoulders to make sure I don't mess it up, you know? So we're lucky in that sense that we have a real strong history.
93 years.
Well, if we turn back to clock to this time in 2019, 2 years ago, you were heading into the school year. And if you can remember going back, to that point, what was being discussed and what were the goals and objectives of, the different districts as you just headed into what we thought was going to be a regular school year?
Yeah. So when I think back about 19, I think there's a couple things that are kind of mundane, but worried about officials. We have a hard time finding officials for football and soccer and softball, and in talking about how we could do a better job of that was something. Always talking about that release of testing and assessment data as it comes out in the fall. We always want to know some things about that and how we're doing, how that compares, how we can do better on those. So that's always a constant focus. Trying to think back to 19. Virtual education was kind of new to the scene in Missouri. They had opened it up and expanded some of that, and really talking about how we were providing that access to students in a way that's meaningful, because a lot of students may gravitate towards virtual, but it may not always be the best fit, in making sure that we had some good ways to watch that success, or if they weren't being successful, what other things we could do. So a lot of talk around virtual education at that point too, because it was something that was new that would have opened up in the state in that fall. And
it's funny, not funny, that's the wrong word to use, but I've said that there are things that we learned, such as I don't think we'll ever really be on top of each other, like in the grocery store line again. And there's some things that we just said, like, why did we do this in the first place? You learn so much about virtual learning, good and bad, but you got a crash course in it. So I'm sure a lot of knowledge has come forth that will help in the future with just, how school districts are going to handle it.
Absolutely. Even meetings with our superintendents, we will use a combination now of both in-person and virtual. The virtuals will happen on a more regular basis. We're people in school, so to say. So we like being around each other and sharing, breaking bread and doing those things. But really, we'll still continue to use a virtual platform going forward. And that's something I would have never dreamt of 2 years ago. It's become so ingrained in what we do. And I'll be honest, if there is any silver lining, which there's not a whole lot with the pandemic, our network of superintendents is as strong as it's ever been. They really have built, a lot of times it was hard to get somebody from Jefferson County in with somebody from St. Louis County and somebody from Lincoln County, but we could do breakout sessions in our virtual groups, and they would be in a small group like this and be able to talk through things and really see how much commonalities they have between three very diverse districts. So that's been powerful to create that network.
Doctor, this has been such a confluence of stuff for the superintendents. It's a confluence of obviously the acute health concerns of their students and their staffs and the faculty and so forth. And then you got the politics, and you've got the school board politics probably, and you've got, concerns about how this is going to affect test scores, as a result of this. What would you say keeps, without getting any specific conversations, these superintendents like nobody else, if you had to generalize, what part of this keeps them up at night at this point? What do you think they're really focusing on that really is the big concern for public education going forward as a result of what we've been through?
I think what keeps them up at night is keeping kids safe. We're not medical experts. And as you shared, it's become very political. So we find ourselves in this tension between maybe what we had over 400 pediatricians sign off on a letter that said masks should be in school. And then you have this tension on the other side that says, you're not going to make my kid wear a mask. And I think how they can handle that and work with their community to really keep kids safe keeps them up at night, because truly that's our charge. How do we create a learning environment where kids are safe, respected, they have the tools they need to be successful? How do we do that? And I think it's been difficult because it has been so politicized. I mean, my colleagues are worn out, I'll be honest. And I don't expect people to feel sorry for superintendents. I mean, we chose to do what we do, but they're tired, because every turn, it seems like during the pandemic, whatever decision they were going to make, about half of their community was going to be upset. Right. You know, whether it was return to school or not return to school, whether it was a mask or not mask. And I think that just wears on people. You know, it's just that constant weathering of this decision's going to result in 500 emails. This decision's going to result in 400. And I think it just wears on them. And really, ultimately, we want to keep kids safe. And I think that's where we go back to this political tension that's been created. You know, over the years, many times I had parents come to me and said, my pediatrician said, and they have always been looked to as a profession that really had kids' best interests. But yet in this case, we have 400 of them that are saying, really, our best course of action right now, given that not all kids can be vaccinated, and that we have a surge of the Delta variant in our community, best thing is to wear a mask. But yet it seems like we've dismissed that a little bit, even though pediatricians have always been held to pretty high esteem. So I think they struggle with that, and where to get that guidance and how to balance that with their community expectation.
Well, that county, maybe superintendents that, you know, have been on the job 20, 25 years, maybe a little shorter period of time. But have you seen in our area, like you say, what you cover with EducationPlus, but there's other organizations like in Kansas City. I'm sure you have discussions, with those groups. Are you seeing superintendents just saying, like, I'm done with this? And when I say that, like, not being a superintendent, but not being a superintendent around here, are we losing some good people in this state and in this region over this?
Yeah, and I think many times the superintendents are leaving the profession altogether.
Okay.
They've made the decision that, because oftentimes superintendents are very well educated, and oftentimes they've had some experiences running large organizations. So there are other people that would look for that type of talent base, and they've said, there's an easier place for me to work and not feel this tension. I mean, it took a toll on many of because it becomes very personal for all of us. I mean, health and safety is personal for everybody. And as parents and community members weigh in with the politics too, on top of that personal emotion of safety, it really did wear on a lot of my colleagues, and you see it in them. And we did have several leave last year. I would say sooner than they would have. Certainly all of them made a choice, and it was the right one for them. But I do think we lost several last year due to just this tension and this anxiety and the pressure of trying to make these decisions that we know so many people are really not going to be happy with, regardless.
All right, Dr. Ziegler, if I can take strange politics for 25. We've talked about your superintendents and politics, and one of the inescapable issues of our day, it seems, is something called critical race theory. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure, based on, and I don't know much about it, most of us hadn't even heard of it, but now that we're hearing about it a lot, and I know I was talking to Alvin off camera about this, I'm pretty sure that by definition, none of your districts, if they're high schools, teach it, because it's not taught in Missouri high schools by and large. Wow. But that said, is it on their radar? Because again, it is getting so much national and state attention, Rockwood and other school districts, where people want to make sure we ban something that doesn't presently exist now. What can you tell us about that?
I think the biggest thing comes down to how do you define critical race theory? Because I think what's happened, critical race theory, in my understanding, was really a legal concept to allow someone to look through a different lens at, whether it's laws or processes or procedures within a community, to see how they may have some discriminatory pieces to them, based on the lens of what you would look at it. And it's really came out of law schools. That is not being taught in our schools. But what I think has happened is people have started to add diversity, equity, and inclusion work, which is work we've done for decades in schools. And I can give you some examples. And they've rolled that into this idea that it's critical race theory. And it's not. Diversity, equity, inclusion are things I can give. The easiest is we in 142, in 1974, we passed the law to make sure that we're providing for students that have special needs. And at that time, we decided we're going to offer other support, other resources, maybe additional resources to students that had special needs to make sure they were able to access the curriculum, that they were included in the least restrictive environment. And we did that, and nobody said a word about it. Another way that we practice equity, inclusion, the free and reduced lunch program. I think the majority of people out there feel giving a child that needs a nutritious meal, a meal during the school day is positive. That's something that helps them be successful, and we want our kids to be successful and learn as much as they can. But when they start to roll inclusion, diversity, and equity into critical race theory and try to make it seem like that's something schools shouldn't be doing, we'll fight tooth and nail because we've been doing it for years, and we're going to continue to do it because it's an important way for us to support our kids. So if it's critical race theory in its purest concept is what I would say, that looking at things through a lens that would allow you to recognize discriminatory practices, no, that's not something we're really practicing in our schools. I think there was a recent, over 400 schools responded to a survey by DESE, and I think one in the state recognized that they were using that as part of an upper level class. Outside of that, there's really not any evidence that it's being used in our schools, but the other things are.
All right, as we head back, I know I would think most, and I'll say like middle school, high school age, mask, no mask. I bet those kids are just ready to just go back to school and ready to go to class and ready to go to the football game and the basketball game and their social activities. I mean, are you feeling that even with all the political back and forth and the school boards, superintendents, that kids are just ready to just try to do the best they can to live their lives that they missed for a couple of years?
Kids are resilient. You know, they really are. And sometimes I think we make issues for them. I can think back about times I've had to do boundary changes when I was a superintendent. And oftentimes the parents were upset, but the kids walked into the new school and next thing they know, they saw Bobby from soccer or something, and they're off and running. And the parents are still upset. So sometimes we make adult problems, kid problems. And I think that's the case here. Kids want to be back together. Nobody wants to wear a mask. I don't want to wear a mask. I don't think anybody's out looking for a reason. But if it keeps kids safe and allows them to be in school and not be disruptive, they're going to do it because they want to be with their friends. They want to be with their teacher. They want to be somewhat normal. And that's our best way to not have those disruptions is to have the mask. I know not all of our communities are going to do it, and I respect that. It's their choice. It's their community, and they have to make those choices. But I know that the best way for us to implement the modified quarantine where students can stay in the classroom is when all kids are wearing masks. So that point, I think, for parents and for kids, if they don't have to go home for 10 days because they were in close contact with, that's a good thing. We want to keep them as normal, keep them in school as long and as often as possible. And if that means wearing a mask, I think a lot of kids would say, put me in a mask.
Another question jumped in my head when you said that. If a school district, or really just say, let's say a high school, okay, wanted to kind of follow the National Football League model and said like, okay, we're not telling anybody what to do. But if we get to 85%, nobody has to wear a mask. And we can like really just do everything, you know, the way everybody wants to do it. Would that be out of line? Have I crossed some kind of like educational ethical line, or, you know, like you're not forcing anybody, but if they just put that out there, what would you think?
You know, we looked at it a different way. And it was during early time of the pandemic as we were starting to bring kids back last fall. And it was really looking at, hey, community, if we can lower our transmission rate, reduce the number of cases we have in a community, then we can move to more normal. It never really caught traction. I could see some of those incentivized, saying, hey, community, if we're able to do these things, then I'm able to roll school back out without masks. I think the incentive for the vaccine would probably be looked at by some as us trying to strong arm folks into it. I think it has merit in that if we know that if we hit certain thresholds, things can look much more normal. I just don't know that you'd see a school doing it. I have heard of schools in other communities incentivizing it in other ways, even offering financial rewards, I think, in some states. I don't think you'll see that in Missouri. There's still quite a bit of kind of vaccine hesitancy all throughout the state, from rural to urban. And I just don't know that there would be a lot of support with school boards to incentivize something that way. I think it's a great idea in the sense that if we got there, we really could, and I think you'll see some athletes sometimes athletics are a strong motivator. And the idea of not having to miss games or other competitions if they're vaccinated, I think might prompt some kids to do that as well. And that's just part of the guidance.
Okay, well, maybe that's where we start. Put that out there. I'm sure some coaches are probably hinting at that.
Yeah, I may have heard a few say, well, if they can get it now, they could have their second vaccine in time for, I know that's out there. And I know that's important to our kids because it is such a fabric of what we do in schools. It is the learning, it's the extracurriculars, it's all those pieces that make a community. And that's the important part. And that's what we want to get back to.
Yeah. Doctor, I love what you said about the kids, because I've had pediatricians on a radio show make the point that the little kids especially like the mask. It's like Halloween every day, and they think they're cool, and they got, they're all kind of one-upping each other with how cool their masks are. And I guess, which leads me to a question, do you think, to Alvin's question, maybe a follow-up is, would it be the teachers, the administrators, the students, or the parents that are most excited about returning to school after this pandemic? It's kind of,
my wife's a teacher, and she was actually in person all last year. I think that there are many teachers that are going to really find great joy in that start of school. There's no day that's, after you get them out of bed kicking and screaming that they don't want to go back to school, there's no day more exciting for a teacher than their first day of school. I mean, it just is. They're meeting their kids, they're establishing those routines. So I think our teachers are probably the most excited about having some sort of sense of normal return to school. I'll be honest, our leaders are still pretty anxious because they just don't know what's going to happen between now and the majority of our schools will start around August 23rd. And there's a lot of time. We've watched over the last several weeks how things have changed, and we make plans. And we did this last summer. It seemed like forever. We'd make a plan and then we'd find out something else and have to, change. And I know they're anxious about what happens between, today, August 5th and August 23rd. That's going to make me have to revamp my plan and re-message to my teachers, to my students, to my community, and to my parents. And I think they just get nervous about that. So, and I know parents want to get back to.
I was going to say, I've heard at least a couple of parents that are looking forward to this.
Yep.
My wife is a teacher too.
I'm just
and she's ready to because she works for a special school district in St. Louis County, and she is a vision itinerant teacher. Mm-hmm. And, she said, look, when I had to be here and do it, that was fine. But I really need to be there, and I need to be in class. And I just think that, I think most teachers, at least, regardless of how they feel about being vaccinated, said like, no, I really like doing my job. And I really like being there around the kids. So, first day is coming. And I got to ask you, and you can share anything what you want in this last minute, but my guess is that you're looking forward to the first day of school this year.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we've worked so hard to try and come up with ways that we can get kids back in school face-to-face. And we've come up with ways that we can minimize that disruption. My life's easier when they're all back in school and normal because there's less meeting, there's less things I got to do to try to figure out. So certainly I'm excited for that. I'm excited for our teachers. I'm excited for our parents. I'm excited for our community. I continue to come to the office pretty much every day throughout, and it's kind of a different feel when you're out there on the highways and people aren't moving around. Mm-hmm. It's been nice to even see that kind of return to normal. So I think the closer our community can get to normal, the better. I'm still a little worried about where this all ends up with the new variants and things, but but I know we all have that thirst to get back and be together.
No, I heard you. Now, one thing I do disagree with you on, I was like going to work, and when there were no cars out there, that was fine. Dr. Ziegler,
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you so much. Hey, have a great school year, and everybody out there, have a great school year. It's going to get better. Thank you for joining us on Next Up. We'll see you next week. On behalf of Ray and myself, you have a great night.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.